welcome everybody. You are listening to Intersect, which is a podcast dedicated to the celebration and the promotion of the convergence of God, the world, and the church. I'm your host. My name is Matt Skolnick, and I am also the executive director of about 6 dozen Reformed churches in Eastern Ohio. Today's episode is slightly different for 2 reasons. Number 1, we are including video for the duration of the podcast, which is pretty exciting. So you can either listen as you normally do on your favorite podcast player, on your phone or online, or you can watch the whole thing on YouTube. And so I want to give a special shout out for those who helped put this together. Number 2, I want you to know that my audience is slightly different today. Normally, I speak to 2 groups of people. The first group of people I try to speak to is just anybody out in the world who has a sense that the world is broken and that there is something more that we can do, something more that we can tap into. And number 2, I speak to Christians in general across the world who very similarly look at the church, and whether we're looking at a denominational or non-denominational church, we look how it functions, how it works, what it focuses on, and we say, oh man, we're doing this wrong. I don't think we're being faithful here today. So those are the 2 audiences that I normally speak to. Today I want to speak more specifically to the thousands of Christians in Eastern Ohio that I spend time with, whom I love, whom I cherish, whom I'm very thankful for. With that being said, whether you are part of those thousands who are in Eastern Ohio or not, I do fully believe that some of the things that I'm going to share with you can benefit you for a variety of reasons. Number 1, they can just help shape your thoughts. Number 2, maybe you'll be inspired by the trajectory of what we are doing. And I guess I can follow that up. If you want help, if you're outside of the bounds of where I traditionally serve, I would be happy to talk to you, to discuss, to listen to you, to hear what you're doing, and see if there's a way that I and some of the people who work with me can encourage you. So there's just a brief introduction. Today, as I speak to the thousands of Reformed Christians in Eastern Ohio, I want to talk about a few specific things. Number 1, we have our first ever Leadership Summit, which is coming up on February 11th. It's down in Cambridge, Ohio. For those who are listening and for those who are watching, we'll include a link. You're more than welcome to join us. The whole point of the Leadership Summit is to just provide space for individuals and groups of people who can come from churches, to allow our hearts, allow our minds just to be focused and pushed towards God's mission, God's love, God's goodness, God's faithfulness out into the world. This particular day is going to run from 10 o'clock in the morning to 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We are taking reservations for the sole purpose of making sure that we have enough food for you. If you want to register, go ahead and check that link that's below. And the other thing that if for whatever reason, sometimes the link doesn't work. If it does not work for you, please just send me an email. I'll put your name on the list and we'll make sure that we have food there for you as we move ahead. Number 2, in our group, we have recently invested in a wonderful woman. Her name is Terri Bate. Terri is a lifelong lover of mission, both locally, and internationally. We have hired Terri to be our first ever Director of Mission Development. Our first ever Director of Mission Development, which means she's going to work with regions within Eastern Ohio and see if there is a way that she can help provide, along with me and along with the thousands of people who are in our numbers, local, what we would call mission partners, or some people would call missionaries, just to walk alongside of our churches and to help them really think through how can we love our communities, whether it's a poor community or a rich community, whether it is a community that is small or if it's a larger city, whether it's a community that has a group of established Christians who've been there for a long time, or whether you are in a brand new faith community. The whole point of this is to what we would call in the church to reach out for two specific reasons. I don't quote the scriptures a lot on the podcast, but I'll just make reference to two scriptures. Number one, Matthew 25. Matthew 25 is a place where Jesus has a teaching. Sometimes we call these teaching parables. And in this particular parable, Jesus makes it very clear that if we are to follow Christ, that one of the things that we are supposed to do is take care of human need, whether that's visiting people in prison, whether that's feeding them or clothing them, those types of things. And then the second piece of this is what we would focus on, or we would call Matthew 28. In Matthew 28, Jesus gives what is commonly referred to as the Great Commission. And in the Great Commission, Jesus encourages his disciples to go out and to welcome others into this vibrant, life-giving faith community that is centered around God's kingdom of healing and kingdom of wholeness. And then we are supposed to do that in a way that raises people to be mature in the faith. And so when we talk about Terri being a director of mission development, we're talking about two sides of that coin. And sometimes we have churches who focus on one, or we have churches who focus on the other. But I think if we take the lessons of Jesus, that those two teachings, those two ways that we are supposed to live are intimately intertwined. And so if you're out there, I would love for you to invite me and to invite Terri. We can come to your region, talk to a small group or a large group. We could talk to one church or many churches. We could talk to people in the Presbyterian tradition, or people from all sorts of Christian traditions or no tradition at all. We just would like to share that vision so that we can get started. We do know that this is going to take some funding, and I have been convinced that in the past handful of months, even though I have been thinking that my understanding is big enough to be God-sized, I am more and more convinced that my thinking is not big enough. And so we initially were looking to raise about $500,000 a year. I think we can do that easily. With that being said, I think perhaps to move the church forward in the region, we need to bump that number up significantly. And so we're going to be looking for people who have a heart for that Matthew 25 and that Matthew 28 at all levels of giving. We are very hopeful. We are looking forward that there are going to be people who come and hand those $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 checks over to advance the work of the church. We truly believe that there are those types of people out there, but there's all sorts of levels of giving. And so Terri's going to help us with that. Terri's going to help us focus with that. And so one of the things that I would encourage you to do is we start looking forward to local mission development is to really pray for the churches in your region, for the people in your region who may be part or not part of a church, and for a local or an indigenous person who God might be calling to raise them up to be that person that can receive a little extra training and walk with our churches to really embrace that Matthew 25 and that Matthew 28 thought that comes from Jesus. Okay, so that takes care of introducing Terri Bate. Number 3, as we go along here, just for some updates that are going on in January, we have a growing number of conversations for church partnerships. Last year, we started with a handful of churches talking about what would it be like to gather together to focus our energy around a gift-based team where we have people who are skilled at administration, people who are skilled at traditional pastoral ministry with an emphasis on equipping, and people who are skilled for local mission outreach. We commissioned the first group of churches to that last fall. They are just a handful of months into it. They've been building relationships. Things are going well there. We're very, very, very thankful for that. Right now, we're in the process of trying to figure out how can we multiply that and how can we reproduce not just that model, but the energy and the faithfulness that we are seeing arise through that model of partnerships. And so I do want to celebrate that we have a handful of churches that come from our tradition and outside of our tradition who are getting together on a fairly regular basis down in the Uricksville area. These churches come from all different backgrounds. We're so thankful for that. I want to make it clear, I made it clear to that group that we're not here to steal churches, but we're just here to figure out how can we do this together. Because when we have a small church, when we have just a small collection of people who can hardly afford a pastor, how can they afford greater leadership? And really the only answer is by binding together where they can share some leadership, not in a way that stretches the leader too thin, but in a way that provides a team that is holy and healthy for that particular context. And of course, that design can vary greatly. And so we're going to be working with people from our tradition. We started working with some churches who just by invitation came. They wanted to hear. They seemed pretty excited. They realized that whether they are from a non-denominational background or denominational background, that we are people who need this help together. And I just want to take a moment to emphasize one of the patterns that I have seen as I've seen these groups of churches come together. Number one, I do believe that it is true that our churches have to come to a place where they fully realize, where we fully realize that we can't do it on our own, where we're broken, where we're lost, where it just seems beyond our imagination. And it is from that position of weakness that people are willing to work together. And of course, that reminds me a lot of some teachings that are in the scripture. One of them that comes to mind is that God's power is made perfect in our weakness. That comes out of 2 Corinthians chapter 12, if you want to go ahead and take a peek at that. And so whether we have our initial partnership, a partnership down in Uricksville that's forming, we also have one that seems to have some energy behind it, and we're going to continue to take some steps down in the Zanesville corridor. And so please pray for those regions. Please pray for those churches, for those pastors, for those staff. Please pray for those elders, that there would be wisdom. Please pray that they would be open to insight into the movement of the Holy Spirit. Okay, moving right along, there are a handful of podcasts, speaking of podcasts, since we're doing one, that I think are really essential to help forming our thoughts about what it means to reach out. And so if you haven't looked at two recent podcasts, one that comes from the Christmas season, it's called Birthing Jesus, and the other one is Ministry Pipelines, that was done with Pastor Mike Smith. Please check those out. The Birthing Jesus podcast is really a redo of a sermon that I gave at Redurban Presbyterian Church in Canton, Ohio. It's a call for the church to see that in the way that Mary gave birth to Christ, that we have the ability and the call to give birth to Jesus and God's love in our local community. So check that out. And then the other one, the Ministry Pipelines, I think is so important. We've been talking a lot about next steps in all of our conversations. And so one of the things that the Ministry Pipeline highlights is that we just don't do first hellos in our communities, but that we are out there in such a way that we have the ability to say hello to the masses, but we also follow that up with acts of service to subsets within those masses. And then really our goal, as we emphasize both Matthew 25 and Matthew 28, is to welcome people into a healing and a whole community. A community of wholeness is probably a better way to say that. A community that is surrounded by the love of Christ. And so it doesn't matter if they are welcomed into our own churches or if they create new communities of faith or we find another church for them to go to, but we want to be able to give people stepping stones because it is very intimidating to go into a church. And the other thing is, my goodness, who wants to go into churches? The way that we structure and we live life, we're often so insular. We're often focused on ourselves. We're often filled with, we think we're friendly, but we're filled with this idea of you have to be within the club. And I think the message of Jesus is that God's children are all those who are created. For all of it is God's creation, and the call of Christ, the call of God, the call of God's love upon our lives is for everybody. And so we need to continue to live into that. That takes care of some podcasts that I would really encourage you to look towards. And then we're going to wrap up with a handful of things. The first two are administrative, and the third is another opportunity for some training. So number one, you'll see in the link to this YouTube video and to the podcast an ability to save my contact information. I would love to get a hold of you. We're trying really hard across the thousands of people in our area that we're working with to be able to stay in better communication with people. And so part of that, or half of that equation, is to make sure everybody has our contact information. You will see that I will leave the contact information not just for myself, but also for Terri Bate, who is that wonderful director of mission development. The second thing, if you go to our main webpage, I'll leave a link again, mvpresby.org. At the top right now, you can sign up for our email newsletter. We'd love for you to do that because we have a lot of exciting things going on. And as those things are going on, we want people to be informed about it. And we do recognize that there's no perfect form of communication. And we do recognize that it takes 6, 7, 8, 10 times for people to hear something before it really sinks in. And so please sign up for that. Of course, that is a way for you to hear some of the news. Some other things that you can do are you can listen to the podcast. Subscribe to the podcast, check out the YouTube channel. A lot of the same themes will be repeated in different ways as we encourage one another. And then finally, we have been doing this training over and over again in different regions across Eastern Ohio, which is called Prayer Lab. It's something that I developed. It's something that I'm very thankful for. Most specifically, I'm thankful for how people have been engaging within it. Is really a beautiful thing. The whole purpose of Prayer Lab, the whole purpose of Prayer Lab is that individuals often are hesitant or afraid or scared to pray out loud with others. And so we come in, we recognize that we have this common fear. I provide some basic skills, I provide some encouragement, and throughout our practices and our conversations through this 3-hour workshop, people's level of confidence and their skill goes up. It is really a beautiful thing to see. So I'll provide a link for some of the prayer labs that are coming up in the region. With that being said, I'd be happy to go anywhere to do this. And the other side of that is I'd be happy to train anybody to lead it because there's only so much that I can do. One of the things that we're trying to figure out in all of our churches is that pastors are equippers. Pastors just aren't doers. And so if you hear the call of God on your heart, you hear the call that perhaps this is something that you have a passion for and God is put it on your heart, let's talk. Let's see if there's a way that I can provide you with some training, give you the materials, send you out there and help you build up other Christians as well. So there are some highlights that are going on across Muskingum Valley in January 2023. Again, we're very thankful for all the people who give. We're very thankful for all the ways people serve, for our pastors and for our elders. I really just want to encourage you to keep up the work, keep working forward, keep making that next step, and you can do that in a variety of ways. So please be in touch. I love you. God bless you, and God keep you. We'll meet again soon. Bye-bye.